Have you ever wondered why people often become more interested in someone after being ignored? It seems completely irrational. You would expect attention to create attraction and indifference to destroy it. Yet real life often tells a different story. Someone who replies immediately is appreciated for a while, but the person who suddenly becomes distant often occupies far more space in another person's mind. They begin checking their phone more often. They replay old conversations. They wonder what changed. They become emotionally invested in finding answers. This is not always because the person who is ignoring them is more attractive. It is because the human brain reacts very differently to what feels uncertain and difficult to obtain. One of the strongest reasons people chase those who ignore them is the psychology of scarcity. The moment attention becomes limited, the mind often begins assigning it greater value than it actually deserves. This pattern appears throughout human behavior. When something is available in unlimited supply, people appreciate it but rarely obsess over it. The moment access becomes limited, desire often increases. The object itself has not changed, only its availability has. The same principle quietly influences relationships. When someone's attention is always guaranteed, the brain quickly adapts to it. It becomes normal. But when that attention suddenly becomes scarce, the mind treats it as something that may be lost. Instead of asking, do I really like this person? People often begin asking, why am I no longer receiving the attention I expected? That single question can keep repeating in the mind for days or even weeks. The human brain dislikes losing access to something it believes it already had. If someone who once gave frequent attention suddenly becomes distant, the brain interprets the change as an unfinished problem that needs solving. Instead of letting go, many people become even more emotionally focused. They check whether the other person has viewed their messages. They analyze every word of the last conversation. They search for hidden meanings behind small changes in behavior. The less information they receive, the more their imagination begins filling the gaps. Ironically, the silence often becomes more emotionally powerful than the conversations that came before it. Another reason scarcity creates pursuit is because people naturally connect rarity with importance. Imagine receiving compliments every single hour from dozens of people. Eventually, each compliment would lose part of its emotional impact because it becomes expected. Now imagine receiving sincere appreciation from someone who rarely gives compliments. Those few words suddenly feel much more meaningful. The words themselves may be identical, but their emotional weight changes because they are perceived as rare. In relationships, attention often follows the same psychological pattern. Limited attention is frequently interpreted as more valuable than constant attention, even when there is no logical reason to believe that. This is why many people become fascinated by those who seem emotionally unavailable. They begin assuming that if this person's attention is difficult to receive, it must be extremely valuable. Their mind quietly creates a story. If I can finally earn this person's interest, it will prove that I am special. At that point, the chase is no longer driven only by attraction. It is driven by the desire to obtain something the brain has labeled as rare and therefore important. The pursuit becomes emotionally rewarding because every small sign of attention feels like progress toward a valuable prize. However, this is where people often confuse perceived value with actual value. Someone may ignore others because they are emotionally mature and genuinely busy, but someone else may ignore people simply because they lack respect, emotional availability, or genuine interest. Scarcity alone does not reveal character. Yet the brain often overlooks this important distinction. Instead of asking whether the person deserves their attention, many become completely focused on winning attention from that person. The pursuit continues not because the relationship is healthy, but because the scarcity itself has become psychologically compelling. Notice how this process quietly changes priorities. At the beginning, someone may have felt only mild interest, but after being ignored, their thoughts become increasingly occupied by the same person. They begin investing emotional energy into understanding the silence instead of evaluating whether the relationship is actually right for them. The more unavailable the other person appears, the more important they begin to seem. This is one of the greatest psychological illusions in relationships. Scarcity creates perceived value, and perceived value often feels indistinguishable from genuine attraction. It is important to understand that this does not mean ignoring people is the secret to making them chase you. Artificially creating distance or withholding attention as a strategy is manipulation, and manipulation rarely builds healthy or lasting relationships. The goal is not to imitate scarcity, but to understand why the human mind reacts so strongly to it. Once you recognize this pattern, you stop confusing emotional pursuit with genuine compatibility. You begin asking a better question. Am I attracted to this person because they truly add value to my life, or because my mind is reacting to the fact that their attention feels scarce? That single question has the power to break the illusion. It shifts your focus from chasing unavailable attention to understanding your own emotional responses. And that is where real clarity begins, because scarcity may start the chase, but it is uncertainty that keeps people trapped in it long after common sense tells them to walk away. And once scarcity captures the mind, the next psychological force becomes even more powerful. Emotional uncertainty begins turning simple curiosity into lasting obsession. Scarcity may spark the initial pursuit, but it is emotional uncertainty that keeps the chase alive. This is where human psychology becomes even more fascinating. When people know exactly where they stand with someone, their minds eventually relax. They stop questioning every interaction because certainty gives the brain a sense of closure. But when someone's behavior becomes unpredictable, warm one day, distant the next, interested one moment, and completely silent the next, the mind rarely finds peace. Instead, it keeps searching for answers. That is one of the biggest reasons people chase those who ignore them. They are not only chasing the person anymore, they are chasing certainty. The human brain is naturally uncomfortable with unanswered questions. Imagine reading a novel and stopping just before the final chapter. Your mind keeps wondering how the story ends because it dislikes unfinished experiences. Relationships work in a surprisingly similar way. When someone's intentions remain unclear, the brain treats that uncertainty as an unfinished emotional puzzle. Every delayed reply, every mixed signal, and every unexpected silence becomes another missing piece. Instead of moving on, people begin investing more mental energy into solving the mystery. This explains why inconsistent attention often creates stronger emotional fixation than complete rejection. If someone clearly says, I am not interested, the truth may hurt, but eventually the mind has something solid to accept. There is closure. But when someone gives attention one day and disappears the next, hope never completely dies. The brain keeps asking, what if they still care? What if they were just busy? What if I said something wrong? These endless possibilities prevent emotional closure, making it far more difficult to let go. Notice how quickly uncertainty changes behavior. A person who was once calm and confident suddenly starts checking their phone every few minutes. They replay conversations in their head, searching for hidden meanings. They examine social media activity, wondering why someone viewed a story but did not send a message. Every small action begins carrying exaggerated importance because the mind is desperately trying to reduce uncertainty. The less information it receives, the more stories it creates to explain the silence. One of the strongest psychological forces behind this process is anticipation. The brain releases emotional excitement not only when it receives a reward, but also while waiting for one. This is why an unexpected message from someone who has been ignoring you can feel far more exciting than 10 predictable messages from someone who consistently shows interest. The unpredictability itself makes each moment of attention feel emotionally significant. Over time, people stop chasing the relationship itself and begin chasing the emotional high created by occasional signs of interest. This is why mixed signals are so powerful. When someone behaves inconsistently, they unintentionally create an emotional cycle. A small amount of attention raises hope. Silence creates anxiety. Another brief moment of warmth brings relief. Then distance returns again. This repeating pattern keeps emotions constantly active because the outcome is never certain. The mind becomes focused on predicting the next interaction instead of objectively evaluating whether the relationship is healthy. The chase continues because uncertainty feeds emotional investment. However, there is an important truth many people fail to recognize. Uncertainty does not necessarily mean someone is valuable. It simply means their intentions are unclear. Yet the human mind often confuses these two completely different things. Instead of asking whether the relationship is built on respect and consistency, people become obsessed with decoding unpredictable behavior. They mistake confusion for chemistry and inconsistency for emotional depth. In reality, many healthy relationships feel peaceful precisely because they do not require endless guessing. Emotionally mature people understand this difference. They appreciate clarity more than excitement created by confusion. When someone consistently ignores them while offering only occasional attention, they do not automatically assume the person is mysterious or highly valuable. Instead, they ask whether the relationship provides trust, respect, and emotional stability. If the answer is no, they recognize that uncertainty is controlling their emotions rather than genuine compatibility. This awareness protects them from becoming trapped in endless pursuit. Another reason uncertainty keeps people chasing is that the imagination is often more powerful than reality. When information is missing, the mind fills the empty spaces with assumptions. People begin imagining future conversations, future relationships, and future possibilities that may never actually happen. The less they know, the more freedom their imagination has to create an ideal version of the other person. Eventually, they are no longer chasing who the person truly is. They are chasing the version their own mind has created. This is why emotional uncertainty can become addictive. Every unanswered question creates another reason to stay mentally attached. Every small sign of attention feels like progress toward finally understanding the situation. Yet the understanding rarely comes because the cycle depends on unpredictability. As long as certainty remains out of reach, the pursuit often continues. Understanding this psychological pattern changes everything. Instead of interpreting uncertainty as proof that someone is special, you begin recognizing it as a natural trigger for the human mind. You stop glorifying mixed signals and start valuing emotional clarity. The strongest relationships are not built on constant guessing, but on mutual trust, consistent effort, and honest communication. True attraction may involve excitement, but lasting love never depends on confusion. Once you understand that uncertainty keeps the chase alive, an even deeper truth begins to emerge. Many people are not actually chasing love at all. They are chasing the validation they hope will finally prove their worth. Once emotional uncertainty takes hold, another hidden force begins driving the pursuit, and most people never recognize it. They tell themselves they are fighting for love, but in many cases, love is no longer the real objective. What they are actually chasing is validation. They want the person who ignored them to finally choose them because they believe that moment will erase the pain of rejection. This is one of the deepest psychological reasons why people chase those who ignore them. The pursuit stops being about building a healthy relationship and starts becoming an attempt to restore wounded pride, damaged confidence, and a sense of personal worth. Think about how often someone loses interest the moment the unavailable person finally starts showing consistent affection. At first, they spent weeks or even months trying to gain that person's attention. Every message felt important. Every reply felt like a victory. But once they finally received the attention they wanted, the intense emotional excitement began fading. If the goal had truly been love, the feelings would have continued growing through mutual respect and connection. Instead, the emotional intensity disappeared because the real reward was never the relationship itself. The reward was proving to themselves that they were finally good enough to be chosen. The human ego struggles with rejection because rejection often feels personal, even when it is not. Instead of thinking, this person simply isn't interested, the mind quietly translates the experience into something much more painful. It begins asking, what's wrong with me? Why wasn't I enough? What do they see in others that they don't see in me? These questions create emotional discomfort, and the brain immediately looks for a way to remove that discomfort. The easiest solution seems obvious. Earn the attention of the person who rejected you. If they finally choose you, then perhaps all those painful questions will disappear. This is where the chase becomes dangerous. Every small sign of attention starts feeling like proof that success is getting closer. A single message, a smile, or a brief conversation becomes evidence that the effort is working. Instead of stepping back and asking whether the relationship is healthy, people become emotionally invested in completing a personal mission. Winning the other person's attention becomes symbolic. It no longer represents affection alone. It represents victory over rejection. That emotional shift explains why some people chase those who consistently ignore them while overlooking people who genuinely appreciate them. Notice how strange this pattern can become. Someone who offers consistent care, respect, and attention may receive very little excitement in return. Meanwhile, the person who gives almost nothing continues occupying all the emotional space. This happens because certainty satisfies the need for connection, while rejection activates the need for validation. The ignored person begins believing that if they can just gain approval from the one who withholds it, they will finally feel complete. Unfortunately, validation gained through endless pursuit rarely creates lasting confidence because it depends entirely on another person's opinion. Another reason validation becomes so addictive is that the human mind often confuses difficulty with importance. The harder something feels to achieve, the more valuable it appears. This is why some people become convinced that the relationship they struggle for must be their deepest love. In reality, the intensity they feel is often produced by resistance, not compatibility. They mistake emotional effort for emotional connection. They assume that because the pursuit is exhausting, the reward must be extraordinary. But struggle alone does not prove that something is right for you. Emotionally mature people eventually recognize this illusion. They understand that being chosen by someone who repeatedly ignores them cannot repair insecurities that already exist within them. External approval provides temporary relief, but it does not create lasting self-worth. If your confidence depends entirely on whether one specific person accepts you, then another rejection will eventually create the same emotional pain all over again. Real confidence grows when your value is no longer determined by someone else's willingness to validate you. There is another psychological reason people chase validation instead of love. Rejection creates an unfinished emotional story. Many people cannot accept that not every relationship is meant to happen, so they continue trying to rewrite the ending. They imagine that if they just say the right words, become more successful, or wait long enough, everything will finally work out. Their focus shifts away from understanding the other person's genuine feelings. and toward proving that they deserve a different outcome. They stop asking whether the relationship is mutual and start asking how they can finally earn the approval they believe they need. This mindset quietly traps people for months or even years. They postpone meeting people who genuinely appreciate them because they remain emotionally attached to someone who never consistently valued them in the first place. They sacrifice peace for possibility. They sacrifice clarity for hope. The pursuit continues, not because love keeps growing, but because the need for validation keeps demanding another chance. Understanding this changes the way you see relationships. You begin separating genuine affection from wounded pride. You stop assuming that emotional intensity automatically means emotional compatibility. Instead of asking, why don't they choose me? You begin asking, why am I giving so much power to someone who has shown so little interest in building something real? That single question shifts your attention away from earning approval and toward protecting your own emotional well-being. The truth is that people often chase those who ignore them because they believe being chosen by that person will finally prove their worth. But genuine love never requires you to earn your value through endless pursuit. The healthiest relationships begin when two people freely recognize each other's value without forcing either person to fight for basic attention or respect. And once you understand that the chase is often driven by validation rather than love, the next lesson becomes impossible to ignore. The people who are pursued most are not those who play games, they are those whose self-respect quietly makes their attention feel genuinely valuable. Once people understand that validation plays a major role in the chase, they often make a serious mistake. They conclude that the solution is simple: ignore everyone, act cold, and become emotionally unavailable. They believe that if ignoring makes people chase, then the more distant they become, the more attractive they will appear. This misunderstanding has created countless unhealthy relationships. The truth is far more complex. People do not continue chasing someone simply because they ignore others. They chase those whose attention appears valuable, and true value is created by self-respect, emotional stability, and a meaningful presence, not by calculated indifference. That is why people chase those who ignore them only when that distance reflects genuine confidence rather than manipulation. Think about two different people. The first deliberately leaves messages unanswered, disappears without explanation, and behaves unpredictably just to make others anxious. At first, this may create curiosity, but over time, it usually creates frustration, distrust, and emotional exhaustion. The second person is respectful, kind, and emotionally present when they choose to engage, but they are not constantly available because they have responsibilities, personal goals, and healthy boundaries. They do not chase approval, and they do not organize their life around receiving attention. Which of these two people is more likely to inspire lasting attraction? Almost always, it is the second. The difference is not the absence of attention. The difference is the quality and authenticity behind it. One of the biggest reasons people chase those who seem emotionally independent is that independence communicates self-respect. When someone values their own time, protects their emotional peace, and refuses to beg for attention, they quietly demonstrate that they believe their presence has worth. Human beings naturally notice this. We often assume that people who respect themselves have qualities worth discovering because confidence without arrogance signals inner security. The chase begins not because they are playing games, but because their behavior suggests they are not emotionally controlled by the opinions of others. Notice how quickly attraction changes when someone abandons their dignity in pursuit of another person. Endless messages after being ignored, repeated explanations, constant attempts to gain approval, or accepting disrespect just to keep someone interested all communicate one thing: I value your attention more than I value my own self-respect. Ironically, this often has the opposite effect of what was intended. The more desperately someone seeks attention, the less meaningful that attention begins to feel. Meanwhile, the person who remains emotionally composed often appears more valuable because their attention is given by choice instead of desperation. This does not mean emotionally secure people never express interest. They absolutely do. They communicate honestly, show kindness, and make genuine efforts to build healthy relationships. The difference is that they never continue pursuing someone who consistently shows disinterest. The moment they recognize that respect and effort are no longer mutual, they step back without creating drama. This quiet confidence often surprises people because it reveals something powerful. They would rather protect their self-respect than force a connection that is not freely returned. There is another psychological reason. Self-respect creates attraction. People instinctively observe how others treat themselves. If someone constantly tolerates disrespect, accepts broken promises, and repeatedly lowers their standards just to avoid being alone, others begin assuming that this behavior reflects how they see their own worth. On the other hand, when someone calmly walks away from situations that consistently damage their peace, they communicate that their standards are not negotiable. This does not guarantee that everyone will chase them, but it often increases respect because people naturally admire those who maintain healthy boundaries. Many individuals confuse emotional distance with emotional strength. They believe becoming cold, silent, and detached makes them mysterious. In reality, emotional maturity looks very different. It means being warm without becoming dependent, caring without becoming controlling, and confident without needing constant reassurance. A person with genuine self-respect does not ignore others to gain power over them. They simply refuse to sacrifice their dignity for temporary attention. That difference may seem small, but psychologically it changes everything. Think about the relationships people remember most. They are rarely built with someone who manipulated emotions through endless games. Instead, they are often built with someone whose confidence made every interaction feel genuine. That person listened sincerely, respected boundaries, remained emotionally consistent, and never chased validation. Their attention felt valuable, not because it was intentionally withheld, but because it came from someone who had enough self-respect to give it intentionally. When they invested in a relationship, it felt meaningful because it was based on choice rather than emotional need. This is why people sometimes chase those who ignore them. They mistake emotional independence for emotional distance. In healthy situations, what they are actually responding to is confidence, purpose, and self-respect. In unhealthy situations, they are reacting to confusion and inconsistency. Learning to recognize the difference is essential. Otherwise, it becomes easy to confuse manipulation with strength and emotional games with genuine value. The greatest lesson here is that lasting attraction has never belonged to the person who pretends not to care. It belongs to the person who genuinely values themselves enough to remain authentic, emotionally balanced, and unwilling to compromise their dignity simply to be chosen. Their attention feels valuable because it is sincere, not because it is strategically withheld. That is why respect often outlasts excitement, and authenticity always outlasts manipulation. And once you understand that real value comes from self-respect rather than emotional games, the next truth becomes unavoidable. The moment you stop rewarding someone else's indifference with endless attention, the entire balance of the relationship begins to change. The moment you stop rewarding someone's indifference with your endless attention, the entire psychology of the relationship begins to change. Most people never realize this because they believe persistence always proves love. They think that sending one more message, making one more call, giving one more explanation, or trying one more time will eventually convince the other person to care. But when someone repeatedly ignores your effort while you continue investing more attention, something invisible happens beneath the surface. The relationship slowly loses its balance. One person begins treating attention as something valuable, while the other begins treating it as something guaranteed. This is one of the biggest reasons people continue chasing those who ignore them. Every extra effort rewards the very behavior that caused the emotional distance in the first place. Human behavior is strongly influenced by what gets rewarded. If someone discovers that they can disappear for days, respond whenever they feel like it, give minimal effort, and still receive constant affection, reassurance, and emotional investment, they unconsciously learn that nothing has to change. Why would they value something they never have to earn? The more attention they receive, regardless of their behavior, the less special that attention begins to feel. This does not necessarily make them a bad person. It simply reflects a basic psychological pattern. People rarely appreciate what continues arriving without any conditions, especially when they have grown accustomed to receiving it. This is why many individuals unknowingly create the very situation they are trying to escape. After being ignored, they increase their effort instead of observing the other person's behavior. They send another message because the first one was unanswered. They explain themselves again because they fear being misunderstood. They apologize repeatedly, even when they have done nothing wrong. Every action is driven by the hope that more effort will finally create more interest. But instead of creating attraction, it often creates emotional imbalance. One person keeps investing while the other keeps receiving. Over time, the relationship becomes less about mutual connection and more about one-sided pursuit. Think about what happens emotionally during this process. Every unanswered message increases anxiety. Instead of stepping back, the anxious person often believes the solution is to move even closer. They tell themselves, maybe I wasn't clear enough. Maybe they just need reassurance. Maybe if I show them how much I care, they'll finally appreciate me. But repeated pursuit rarely changes genuine interest. It only communicates that your attention will remain available regardless of how little effort the other person makes. The chase continues because hope keeps replacing reality. Another hidden reason people reward indifference is the fear of losing possibility. As long as they continue reaching out, they feel they are still fighting for a chance. Walking away feels like giving up. However, there is an important psychological difference between giving up on a person and accepting their repeated choices. When someone consistently ignores your effort, they are communicating through their actions, whether they realize it or not. Many people refuse to accept those actions because they are focused only on the outcome they desperately want. Instead of seeing the relationship as it truly is, they continue investing in the version they hope it will become. Notice how this affects perceived value. The more someone repeatedly proves they will stay despite receiving little in return, the more predictable they become. Their attention no longer feels intentional, it feels guaranteed. Predictability itself is not unhealthy, but guaranteed attention without mutual respect often leads to complacency. The ignored person keeps trying harder, while the other person gradually assumes the attention will always be there. The imbalance grows wider with every unequal interaction. This does not mean you should suddenly become cold or disappear simply to make someone chase you. That would only replace one unhealthy pattern with another. The real lesson is much deeper. Stop rewarding behavior that repeatedly shows a lack of interest, respect, or consistency. If someone values your presence, they will naturally make room for it. Healthy relationships are built through reciprocal effort, not endless persuasion. When care flows in only one direction, the relationship slowly transforms into emotional exhaustion rather than emotional connection. Emotionally mature people understand this principle. They express genuine interest without shame, but they also pay close attention to patterns instead of isolated moments. Everyone becomes busy sometimes. Everyone can miss a message or have a difficult week. But repeated indifference reveals something much more important than temporary circumstances. It reveals priorities. Instead of arguing with those priorities or trying to negotiate for attention, emotionally secure people quietly adjust their own investment. They stop chasing what is consistently moving away from them. There is another powerful psychological shift that happens when you stop rewarding indifference. Your attention begins returning to where it belongs. Instead of constantly analyzing another person's behavior, you begin observing your own emotional patterns. You ask healthier questions. Why am I investing so much in someone who rarely invests back? Am I chasing genuine connection, or am I chasing the hope that one day they will become different? These questions replace desperation with awareness. And awareness is where emotional freedom begins. Ironically, many people notice a change only after they stop giving unlimited attention. Sometimes the other person finally realizes the value of what they took for granted. Sometimes nothing changes at all. But in either case, you gain something far more valuable than their response. You regain your dignity, your emotional balance, and your ability to recognize relationships built on mutual respect rather than one-sided effort. Whether someone returns or not becomes less important than the fact that you have stopped teaching others that your attention can be taken for granted. The greatest mistake people make is believing that chasing harder will eventually transform indifference into love. In reality, love grows where effort is shared, respect is mutual, and attention is appreciated instead of assumed. The moment you stop rewarding repeated indifference with endless pursuit, you break the psychological cycle that keeps so many people trapped for years. And once you stop chasing attention that is never freely given, you discover the final truth. The people who are pursued the most are rarely those trying to be noticed. They are the ones who no longer depend on anyone's approval to recognize their own worth. The greatest misunderstanding about attraction is believing that the ultimate goal is to make other people chase you. Society constantly teaches that if someone pursues you, you have won. If they miss you, think about you, or regret losing you, then somehow your value has been proven. But that way of thinking quietly hands your